Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran, and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. And I have with me a very special guest, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, to talk about the regional and global issues of interest or concern to many a capital around the world. And of course, his latest offering with a rather provocative title. But before I come to that, I want to quickly introduce to you, the viewers, about the guest in question, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. Now, he is an author, diplomat, thinker, thought leader. Uh, he's a distinguished fellow, Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore, or the NUS. And between 1971 and 2004, he served in the Singapore Foreign Ministry, and he has held the position of Singapore's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, and was the president of the UNSC between in 2001 and 2002. And he's the author most recently of his book titled Has China Won? The Chinese Challenge to American Primacy. Professor Mahbubani, thank you so much for making time to be on DD India. Appreciate it.
Happy to be with you.
Right. So, Professor, let me get down straight to the obvious question, and that has to do with your latest offering. How and why did this book come about, and what prompted you to write it?
Well, what prompted me to write it was a very, very simple cause.
Okay.
We are about to see a major global tragedy unfold itself in the form of a major geopolitical contest within the world's number one power, which today is the United States, and the world's number one emerging power, which today is China. And I have no doubt whatsoever that this major geopolitical contest between literally two giants is not just going to affect these two countries, but it's going to affect all of us. It's going to shake up the world. So all those of us who are going to be damaged by this unnecessary geopolitical contest, this is the time for us to speak out now to prevent tragedy from unfolding and hurting all of us. So why should we just be quiet bystanders when we are sharing, let's say, a small global village with two elephants, and the two elephants start to fight each other and bring down our houses? Why should we keep quiet?
Indeed. Now, let's parse the title of your book, Professor, to understand the text, context, and subtext of it. Has China won? The Chinese challenge and American primacy. Now, there's a question in it and an underlying assumption in it too. Help our viewers understand what you meant by those phrases.
Well, I mean, when you write a book with a question mark, like, has China won? I shouldn't give you the answer because then you won't buy the book, right? But I'll give you the answer. The answer is no. Or more accurately, not yet. But clearly, and this is the fundamental point I make in my book, that if China keeps on its current trajectory, and if America keeps on its current trajectory, and the most dangerous mistake that America is making in this geopolitical contest, and this is an insight I got from Henry Kissinger, as I say in my book, America has launched a major geopolitical contest against a formidable opponent, China, without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy.
Right.
And a large part of my book is not anti-American. It's a way of waking up my American friends to say, hey, don't you want to think twice and think hard and listen to what major strategic thinkers like Kissinger and Kennan would say about how you're treating this new challenge from China. And the Americans are making a huge strategic mistake in, number one, underestimating China, and two, more dangerously, assuming that whatever the United States did to defeat the Soviet Union he can just do it again and he will definitely win. Unfortunately, if that's the assumption in the American minds, the danger of them losing is very clear. But as I also emphasize, in this geopolitical context, not just China will lose or America will lose, the rest of us will also lose. And that's why I'm speaking out also now.
True. Now, Professor Mahbubani, there are many phrases doing the rounds, and one such phrase which was bandied about some time ago was, quote unquote, peaceful rise of China. Now, that to many a mind around the world is a thing of the past. Why so? Because just look at what Chinese actions were in, for instance, in the South China Sea, vis-a-vis Vietnam, vis-a-vis the Philippines. Look at Chinese attitude or disposition in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Tibet, or even for that matter, vis-a-vis India, where incidents have been reported at the border, delineating India and China. Then there was the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which was, some would say, a form of checkbook diplomacy leading to a debt trap. We saw what China did to Japan in the rare earths row in 2010. And cut to 10 years later in 2020, we are seeing China taking a more belligerent stance against Australia when the Australian government talks about an independent investigation into the origin and spread of COVID-19. So my question to you is this: what happened to so-called peaceful rise of China?
Well, I must say you have put you have put a lot of questions into one question, and I'll try to address as many of them as I can.
Sure.
But I was a student of philosophy, and in philosophy, it's very important to use words accurately. And the word peaceful, peace, means no war. And the word peace means no wars and no shooting. And I was ambassador to the UN, and I was also ambassador to the UN Security Council. It's got 5 great powers: United States, Russia, UK, France, China. Now, out of these 5 permanent members, only one of the 5 has not fought a war in 40 years, since the war against Vietnam. And there's only one power has not fired one bullet across its borders, and that is China. So if you are saying the key word is peaceful, then there is the empirical evidence shows that China has been by far the most peaceful of any of the great powers. Now, but you are absolutely right in one dimension, that as China has become stronger and more muscular, it has become more assertive. And that's perfectly...
And aggressive, perhaps?
Perfectly natural behavior for a great emerging power. But
So my next logical question, Professor, is how should the world treat China if, as you say, it is becoming aggressive and assertive at the same time?
Again, as a student of philosophy, there is a big difference between the meaning of the word aggressive.
Fair enough.
Meaning of the word assertive.
True.
And aggressive does imply very clearly use of military weapons. And as I said, the Chinese have not used military weapons outside their borders. I want to be very clear. And how should China behave now? I cite in my book a very well-known Harvard professor, Graham Allison, who's also come out with a book called Destined for War. War is more likely than not between the US and China. I disagree with that, but nonetheless, he's made a strong case.
Right.
What Graham Allison says, and this is very important, he tells his fellow Americans, my fellow Americans, you keep saying, why can't the Chinese be like us? And Graham Allison says, be careful what you wish for. Because China's emergence as a great power today is at the same stage where America was in the year 1900, when Teddy Roosevelt emerged. And as you know, as soon as America became a great power, it started wars against Spain, it seized Philippines, it fought wars in Cuba and Guatemala, you name it, Panama. So, China is actually behaving unusually for an emerging power. Because if China had behaved like America at the same stage of development, you would have seen many more wars. Now, I can tell you, you mentioned, for example, the relations between China and Japan. When I was in Davos around 2012, 2013, 2014, people would come up to me in the corridors in Davos and say, Kishore, don't you think a war is inevitable between China and Japan? I say, you're right. There should be a war. But let me take a bet with you. There'll be no war. 1 year later, I collected the money. Why was I so confident that I could take bets and put money on the table there'll be no war? Because the Chinese have learned the art of strategic restraint. So they will
strategic restraint.
That's right. They will push. They will be assertive. But they're very careful. They know that once you start firing a bullet, you cannot stop the consequences that follow from that. So it is actually, and I must say, by the way, I cannot guarantee that this will carry on. This is very unusual behavior so far by a great power. And like you, I must say, I was very, very troubled by what happened at the Sino-Indian border. I thought it was very unwise for the Chinese to come up to the border with Bhutan. I thought that was unwise. But at the end of the day, the Indian soldiers and Chinese soldiers were looking each other in the eyes, and no shots were fired. This took strategic restraint on the part of both India and China. But that's good.
But Professor, not firing...
Let me just add a...
Yeah, sure.
If we in Asia can avoid firing bullets and starting wars, that's very important thing we need to do to ensure the 21st century will be the Asian century.
Fair enough. Your point well taken, Professor. Not firing a bullet should always be welcome, no doubt. At the same time, how do you explain Chinese actions in its neighborhood, be it the South China Sea or South Asia, where we see a phenomenon called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, which passes or encroaches upon sovereign Indian territory? We see Chinese actions in India's neighborhood, which are inimical to India's interests, be it India's immediate neighborhood in the Indian Ocean or otherwise. So not firing a bullet cannot be compensation for what China is doing as we speak in its neighborhood.
Let me start with the South China Sea. And what's interesting is that if you do a study of the media, you would have found 10 years ago stories every day, every week on the South China Sea. Today, except for the past few weeks, for years there were no stories on the South China Sea. So you're right, the Chinese have been assertive in their claims on the South China Sea. But let me state a very simple, undeniable fact. If Teddy Roosevelt was the Minister of Defense of China today, he would have occupied all the islands in the South China Sea. He would have done it in 24 hours, and he would say, thank you very much, matter settled. That's what Teddy Roosevelt would have done. That's what China can do. But it has not done it, and we hope that they will never do it. But they have the military capability to take over all of South China Sea. And I'll also make a prediction to you. Very dangerous.
Please do.
There'll be no war in the South China Sea.
There will be no war in the South China Sea, you say?
That's right.
And what makes you say so?
Well, because there will be behind the scenes a lot of discussions, a lot of negotiations, a lot of deal making, and at the end of the day, there will be, and there's one key word I want to use, and I want to emphasize, and I want to, if you don't mind, I'll make a slightly provocative point here for your audience. The difference between the political culture of Southeast Asia and the political culture of South Asia, which, as you know, is where I come from, is that Southeast Asia is pragmatic. It's flexible. it bends, it makes compromises. South Asia is a region where it is very difficult for neighbors to make compromises, make pragmatic deals, and live and work with each other. So, to give you a simple example, I'm not assigning blame. I'm not assigning blame.
Sure.
It is quite shocking that India and Pakistan cannot even have normal trade between two countries. I can tell you, for example, just to give you a concrete example, Philippines today still claims one state in Malaysia, Sabah. But Philippines and Malaysia are fellow members of ASEAN, are trading and working with each other. So that's an example of pragmatism. There's some, you can go for the perfect solution, and you thought you can strive for it. Go ahead. In life, the choice is never the perfect solution, and when you go for the perfect solution, the good solution gets killed. We in Southeast Asia, we don't go for the perfect solution. We accept the fact that we are different. We accept the fact that we have differences. And Malaysia and Singapore, to give you two examples, they were like India and Pakistan. They were one country. We were together, and then we got divorced. And to make matters worse, after we got divorced, we continued to live in the same house. So Malaysia and Singapore have a neurotic relationship. But guess what? You know what? The busiest air route in the world is between Singapore and Malaysia. That's pragmatism. So my answer to your questions is, why doesn't South Asia come to Southeast Asia and ask, why is it this? And South Asia is, by the way, I must emphasize this, is culturally far more diverse than South Asia. Out of 650 million people, you have 250 million Muslims, 140 million Christians, 140 million Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, you have Hindus, Taoists, Confucianists, Communists. We have everything in Southeast Asia. And it has created the second most successful regional organization in the world. The key word is pragmatism. And that's why I'm being very confident about what's happening in East Asia.
Sure. Right. And let's dwell a bit, if you will, Professor, on some of the other regional issues. And I want to specifically talk a bit for a few minutes on the Indo-Pacific regional security architecture. And you happen to be based out of a city which is integral to the Indo-Pacific architecture as we know it. In your estimation, what would be the future for the Indo-Pacific in terms of regional cooperation between ASEAN and, say, the quadrilateral, which includes India, US, Japan, Australia, and generally speaking, India's role in the new Indo-Pacific the architecture going forward as well?
Well, I believe that India is about to enter what I call a geopolitical sweet spot. India is going to become the most courted country in the world. If I'm not mistaken, I actually say that in my book. And this is just, geopolitics has got a certain logic built into it. So, when the United States and Soviet Union, when they were the two big elephants fighting, and when the United States was looking for another elephant to counterbalance the Soviet Union, they didn't give a damn that Mao Zedong had committed enormous human rights violations in the Cultural Revolution, in the Great Leap Forward, in the famines. They forgot all that. They said, China, we must get China on our side. So China entered a remarkable geopolitical sweet spot, and I'll give the Chinese this compliment. They took full advantage of it. Now, today, the main geopolitical contest is between the United States and China. The country that is now entering the geopolitical sweet spot is India, and there are magnificent geopolitical opportunities available to India. But of course, as you know, in geopolitics, cunning. Being cunning is very important. Understanding how you take opportunities from both sides is very important. So sure, Mao and Joe laid out the red carpet for Nixon and Kissinger, but they kept their links with the Soviet Union and kept their links with us. So they played a very careful geopolitical game. So I assure you that if India plays its cards right in the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to enjoy a geopolitical opportunity that may only come once in 1,000 years. So I encourage India to take full advantage of this geopolitical opportunity.
Right. Fair point. I want to go back to another point which you touch upon in your book, and that is to make a distinction between China and the Communist Party of China. Now, you write, and I quote you here, unlike the Soviet Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party is not riding on an ideological wave. It is riding the wave of a resurgent civilization, the strongest and most resilient civilization in history. And you go on to say that the Chinese would much rather live with the perils of communism as long as the Chinese Communist Party gives them a basic modicum of livelihood or lifestyle. So do you still maintain that submission of yours that the Chinese Communist Party might be here to stay for the foreseeable future?
Well, I visited Moscow in 1976 at the height of the Cold War. And I can tell you that Moscow, even in summer, was a dark and drab place. People looked unhappy. And if you went to the world's largest department store, GUM, in Moscow, they had, one toothpaste, one tube of toothpaste. One foot later, one tube of toothpaste. Today, one 7-Eleven carries more stuff than GUM does in terms of variety of products. And so I tell you the story of Moscow because it is very puzzling that in theory, when you are run by a Chinese Communist Party, people shouldn't feel happy. People should look drab. And I saw that in China too. When I first went to China in 1980, people couldn't choose what to wear, where to live, where to work, what to study, and no Chinese travel overseas. Today you go to China, people can choose what to wear, where to live, where to work, what to study. A few 100,000 study in the United States. And each year, 130 million Chinese leave China freely and go back to China freely. But the most important point I'm going to make to you, okay, and this is why people completely misunderstand and underestimate the Chinese Communist Party. If you have tight, rigid Communist Party rule, you have no entrepreneurship. You have no startups. You don't have world-beating corporations. And I can tell you, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the battle for startup technology firms, there are only two competitors, the United States and China. Even Europe doesn't have a chance to get involved in the game. How is it, if China is really run by a rigid, doctrinaire Communist Party, how can it create these brilliant entrepreneurs who create world-class companies week by week for years and years? What is the secret behind that? Why don't we try to find out the secret behind that?
Right. Professor, you've one last couple of questions. You made two predictions on this broadcast. One, that China has not won, number one. Number two, you said that the likelihood of a conflict or a war breaking out over the South China Sea issue is next to nil. I want you to make a third prediction now. I want you to look into the crystal ball, so to speak, and tell our viewers, come November this year, would we see Trump 2.0 in the White House? Or, as Trump says and fears, that China might be doing a Russia in trying to influence domestic American politics to ensure that Trump does not reoccupy the White House come November?
Well, let me give you an answer that might genuinely surprise you. You know, you're right. President Trump has been a very, very difficult president for China. He has launched this major trade war, raised all kinds of unfair demands, attacked China on COVID-19, and the drumbeat of anti-China statements in the Trump administration have been the highest ever. So you're right. Logically, China should be doing a Russia and try to get rid of Trump. That's logic. But I can tell you, this is going to surprise you, that secretly, maybe the Chinese will be happy to see Trump re-elected. Because in the 4 years of Trump's administration, America's global geopolitical space, you know this, has steadily decreased. Its standing and prestige in the world, sadly, and I say this very, very sadly, okay? An Irish writer says, now we pity America, has gone down. In the same 4-year period, China's geopolitical space has increased. China's standing and prestige has gone up. So why shouldn't China have 4 more years of Trump?
Mm-hmm. All right. On that note, Professor Mahbubani, thank you so much for making time to be on DD India and speak to our viewers. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this special broadcast. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.